Wheels of the bus go round and round, round and round, round and round. The wheels of the bus go round and round.
Hey folks, and welcome to this edition of Papaw's Pods. Today we're going to be covering a process that has allowed humans to enjoy more comfortable and more enjoyable and more secure and longer lifestyles for thousands of years. It is called creative destruction. Instead of defining the term, let's introduce this concept with an example. Bill notices that some corn grows bigger and tastes better than the rest of his plants, so he saves some kernels from the best corn and plants them the following year. Jill and Gil just randomly save kernels, usually from the last few ears they eat. After a few years, Bill's corn is consistently bigger and tastes better than Jill's and Gil's corn. Jill learns from Bill and adapts, and now two people are producing bigger and better tasting corn. Gil is not able to change, and over time goes out of business because no one wants his corn anymore. They prefer Bill's or Jill's. So now, at the end of the process, humans in general are better off because they have bigger and better corn. But some of them, in this case Gil, are worse off. This, in a nutshell, is creative destruction. Multiply this interaction across many centuries and many fields of endeavor and billions of people, and you have a relentless march to improve the human condition, and it succeeded spectacularly. If not for creative destruction, we would still be trying to catch our own food without a spear. Instead, the average citizen of today is wealthier and healthier than kings and queens from hundreds of years ago. This is the first session in a 4-part series. In this session, we're going to introduce the major drivers of creative destruction and review how one of the drivers, technology, has led to better quality and more quantity across multiple facets of life. We will identify how most people were helped, but some were hurt along the way. Now, at this point, you may say, Papaw, this is an interesting historical concept, but why would I want to listen to multiple podcasts about it? My answer would be that this process of creative destruction is becoming more intense and is happening more quickly, and you will almost certainly be affected by it at some point in your career. Those of you who understand and accept the concept will have an advantage and will be more likely to adapt when inevitable change occurs. So let's look at some of the major drivers that is driving this process. First, and most important, is technology. How can we expand scientific knowledge and put that knowledge to practical use? The gains and losses here have been enormous, and we will return and expand this in a minute. We'll even devote the entire second session to examining how technology changed just one area, transportation, and the millions of people it affected. Next, maybe not as impactful as technology, but still very significant, is trade and specialization. The concept here is that rather than each person trying to do everything for themselves, they specialize in one area and trade with others for everything else. We'll cover this in the third session. And then we have some others that, while very important, are not as impactful as the first two. We will only have time to list these here and give a brief example. The first of these is a new or changed business model. The example here is where Uber and Lyft upended the taxi industry by replacing full-time workers with a smartphone app and part-time workers. The next category is a regulatory or policy change. In the 1970s, the United States deregulated, that is, removed some protections and restrictions from the airlines. This led to an explosion of low-cost carriers and the bankruptcy of some established carriers. And finally, environmental constraints. Coal is being used less as an energy source, and renewables are being used more. So let's return to one of the two most important change forces, and probably the most important force, technology. The impact here is so vast that we won't be able to come anywhere near examining the entirety. Instead, we will take a few fields and show how applying scientific knowledge has helped most people but hurt others. So let's start with our review of the creative destruction process with communication. In the very beginning, communicating meant speaking, and if you wanted to tell something to people in multiple places, you had to send a speaking messenger to those places. The first big improvement was writing, and in particular the printing press. This allowed many people across many areas to see and learn from the exact same content, but it was bad news for oral storytellers and messengers. Then we have successive improvements with postal service, telegraph, and telephone. I'll specifically mention the telegraph because most people today don't realize how significant and disruptive that was. The ability to send messages instantly across vast distances dramatically changed business and personal communication and severely impacted the postal industry. And now we don't even think about the telegraph because it in turn was done in by the telephone. First radio, then television brought mass communications directly into homes. Television added visuals to radio's sound and left a lot of the radio stations and employees behind. The internet and email allowed more and more communication to be tailored to specific people or one person. This further hurt postal services and even telephone use. And finally, smartphones integrated communication with computing, photography, and numerous other functions. In all of these changes, we see people communicating better and faster. They also left behind many people who depended on a previous phase for their livelihood. Next, let's look at agriculture, truly a technological success story where originally almost everyone was needed to produce enough food to keep us alive. Now, only 1.2% of the total U.S. labor force is directly growing food. More are needed to process and move the food, but very few people are actually growing the food. And they are producing more food than ever for our enjoyment. So, to start with, we have workers with hand tools. Almost everyone in the community needed to help to feed the community. Next, we learned how to domesticate and train animals to pull plows. A single farmer could now cultivate a much larger area than before, instantly reducing the need for large numbers of farmers with hand tools. Next up was the internal combustion engines on tractors. One tractor could now replace dozens of farmers with animals, and it never got tired. This also hurt animal trainers and blacksmiths who were no longer needed. And now precision farming has introduced GPS, sensors, drones, and data analytics. The modern farmer has had to become proficient with all of these, leaving behind those who could not adapt. For our last example, we will look at how manufacturing, or the production of goods, has changed over time. Initially, everything was made by individuals using simple tools. Huge numbers of craftsmen were required to build the products society needed and demanded. Then machines, particularly powered by steam, were added, which increased efficiency and allowed one worker to produce the same output as many. Of course, this meant that many of those individual craftsmen were no longer needed. Next came automated assembly lines introduced by Henry Ford with his Model T automobile. Computers and robots began replacing human workers in many industries. And very recently, artificial intelligence has been added to the mix. In all of these stages, we see the now familiar pattern. Humans benefited as producers made more and more with less and less. But along the way, some individual workers were injured because their jobs were no longer needed. And so that completes our overall review of creative destruction, and that completes this first session. In the next session, we will focus on one area, transportation, and see how some folks were left behind as most of us were able to move faster, more comfortably, and cheaper than ever before.
Wheels of the bus go round and round, round and round, round and round. The wheels of the bus go round and round.